Well, good evening. Today's webinar, another webinar on the deep reinforcement learning from Udacity's nano degree. And today's topic is going to be about the second major project to perform for this course. And that project is the continuous control, also called Reacher. So we'll talk about the project and then go into a couple of hints on how you might be better able to achieve success in the project. And then finally, just talk about a few items to be aware of when you submit the project to make sure that you've covered all the items expected in the rubric. So with that, let's pull up the slides for this evening's talk. Okay, so continuous control, it's the Reach Your Environment project number 2. So as I said, the objectives this evening are to introduce the project and then highlight common reasons that you might find that you might get a rejection if you submit it, not meeting a couple things in the rubric that may be not exactly clear when you first look at them. I mean, they're mentioned in the rubric, but some of the level of detail that you're expected to put in the report in particular or in the README sometimes are confusing. So we'll talk about that. So this is the continuous control project. There's a little picture on the right there that kind of shows the project in action. You can see there's a bunch of robot arms. There are a couple of joints on each arm, and there's an effector at the end of each arm. And the goal of it is to have that end effector show up in the middle of a target sphere. And you can see the green balls are the target spheres, and they basically rotate around each of the different robot arms. And there's actually 20 different robot arms. I'd recommend you do that 20 arm version. It's actually a bit easier than the other option, which is just to do a single arm. But I think you'll find if you actually implement all 20 arms and have your agents all work together, they'll have a better time figuring out how to solve this environment by all 20 of them working together than just having a single one try to solve it by itself. So the reward that you get is every time one of those robot arms falls within the sphere as it's rotating around and tracks that sphere, you get 1/10 of a point of reward. And you need to accumulate a total of 30 points over 100 episodes average to solve the environment. So it's a pretty challenging environment, actually. It's a continuous environment. So the previous project was a discrete action space. This is a continuous action space because you're actually controlling the angles of the robot arms. And so you have to use something different than DQN. And the recommendation here is that you start with an actor-critic model called DDPG. And a good place to start is there's a couple of mini projects that use DDPG. And Bipedal Walker is one of those. That's the one that I would recommend you look at. You can see the code in the Udacity project baseline for that project. And the 3 files you want to look for are DDPG, the notebook. That's basically the basic structure, and you'll take that and you can basically cut and paste parts of that into the initial structure that you get to work with this project that's provided by Udacity in the project notebook. So take a look at that, and it basically shows you how to interface to the DDPG agent and model. And those are the other 2 files you need, the model.python file and the DDPG agent files. So with those 3 files and the starter code that you get with the project, you should be able to put together a working project with a few tweaks to some hyperparameters. So to kind of understand how to interface, you really did the same basic set of tasks in the first project. So you'll repeat them here. You can look at the first parts of the project that the starter notebook has for you. And you'll see examining the state and action spaces and taking random actions in the environment. Those 2 sample cells in the notebook basically give you the hints or ideas on how to interface to the environment, which is a little bit different than the OpenAI gem. They're similar. They have similar kinds of functions that you can call, methods that you can call, but there are a few slight differences. But if you pass the first project, you figured out how to do that. You basically do the same thing here. The only difference is really the brain. When you call the brain, it will return a different size of the state and action spaces than what you had in the previous project, but it really auto configures to that environment. So again, if you've past the first project, you shouldn't have any problem interfacing this project either. That's probably the most difficult part of the first project, and now that you've done that, it should be pretty straightforward here. Again, as in the first project, I would recommend that you start trying to solve this in the Udacity workspace without using a GPU, and then once you've worked out any bugs, switch over to the GPU for longer term learning. I'd estimate most users probably take between probably about 300 to 400 episodes to solve this environment. So just be prepared for that. Excuse me a second. Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. So yeah, start with the workspace without a GPU, and then you feel free to use the GPU if you want to. It'll speed up some learning. Or the last project actually takes about 10 times as long to learn, so you may want to save some of your GPU time for that last project. And then I would also recommend that or encourage you to consider rehosting the environment to your local PC. It's a good experience. It's certainly not required. You should be able to run the entire project within the Udacity environment. It's set up to support that, and most students find success with that. But I would recommend trying to host in your own environment. If you ever do any real work, in the real world, so to speak, you're going to have to be able to do that and bring up a code base and run that code base through the full operation inside of your local environment. And that includes interfacing your Python environment to the CUDA libraries and those sorts of things. That's not necessarily trivial, but it's fairly straightforward. And there are quite a few pointers to how to do that on the web, and you can look at those and for your particular environment, get that working. I really recommend that as a good exercise. So again, it's not required here, just highly recommended. So a little advice on once you get it up and running, of how do you get this feature environment to be solved? How do you get your agent to solve this environment? The first thing I'd really recommend you do, this DDPG algorithm was introduced in a paper by Lillicrap and others, and I would there's a PDF link to the PDF here on the slides. I'd recommend that you pull that paper down. If you haven't reviewed it before, it's a good read and it's worth reviewing. At the very end of the paper, the last half, after basically the main paper and all the references, there's some supplementary information. I'd recommend you, I think it starts on page 11 of the paper, jump over to the supplementary information, and it really gives some good details on like the structure of the neural network that they used for the actor and critic, the sizes of the number of layers and the sizes of the number of neurons in each layer. It's very useful information, and if you take a look at what they did in the algorithms that they used, you could apply those same basic structures to this project, and I think you'll see that they work pretty well here too. Second thing to look at if you're having problems with the agent solving the environment, take a look at the noise process. I would say quite a few papers come in where they've made some adjustments to the noise process, and the adjustments are in a couple different areas. One possibility is to reduce the sigma value. Looks like I lost the screen share here just a second. So you can take a look at reducing sigma and reducing that noise, strength of the noise. You also could consider keeping the noise value, at its default value initially, but then over time adding an epsilon multiplier to that starts at something less than 1 and maybe decays over time. That would emulate a sort of an epsilon greedy noise process or action selection mechanism. So that's a good recommendation. I've also seen several students who successfully replaced the OU noise process with just standard normal Gaussian noise, and playing around there with a similar either epsilon multiplier for decaying over time, or adjusting the mean and standard deviation of the Gaussian noise that you want to use. But those are all things to look at if you have trouble with the agent solving the environment. Another thing I would look at is increasing max T. That's the number of mini steps that you take within a single episode. The more mini steps that you have, the more chance that you have to accumulate points. So that's kind of an easy way to make sure that the system will run as long as it can. It won't run, an infinite period of time, of course, because the done flags are also checked from the environment, and the environment will tell you when it's gone long enough, and it would actually terminate early anyway. So you can increase max T, but do that within reason. And as I said earlier, agents typically take between 200 and 400 episodes to learn this environment, to solve the environment. So you can expect about that period of time. If you've been running for 500 or more episodes and it hasn't solved it, I would take a look at adjusting some of the hyperparameters as we described above. Take a look at the LilliCrap paper and see what they did and what they used, and try to mimic some of those features, or make some changes to the models for the actor and critic. Okay, so now you assume that your agent has solved the environment. You've got a good plot showing all the results, and you've achieved the goal. It's time to prepare the project for submission. So, as before, these are really similar recommendations to the previous project. The first thing is really look at the rubric carefully. Make sure that you cover everything that's required in the rubric. There's quite a few items there, and when the reviewer gets your project, the review process from Udacity has the reviewer validate every single one of those rubric items and comment on what you have or haven't done to meet that item. So make sure that you've included each and every one, because if one's left out, you're gonna have to resubmit, and it's just kind of a time waster for both you and the reviewer to have to go back and redo an entire project just because you left one thing out. So again, before you do the final submission, just make sure that you've reviewed that rubric and covered everything. The two key areas are the README file and the report. So just make sure you've covered all the required items there. And for the dependencies, there's two basic things there. One is showing how you download and install the Unity ML agents library in the Reacher environment. And then also include all the standard Python dependencies that your code base relies on. Things like PyTorch and NumPy, Matplotlib, all the standard dependencies that you use. And I would recommend, just for good practices, again, this is not required, but the best repos out there, they will include with the code base a requirements.txt file that actually has every Python dependency library that the project uses, along with the versions that are required to be compatible with each other. And that really does help users that are taking advantage of your repo to make sure that they have everything installed, and instead of having to go through an iterative process, finding out what's missing, installing it, trying to get dependencies verified. If you include that requirements.txt file, then you'll find that with a single pip command, your users can install everything. It's very convenient. Last thing is preparing the report. Make sure that you cover all the items in the report. And here's a list of the things that really to concentrate on. I'd say that of all the reasons a project would get rejected, it's very unusual that a project gets rejected because it didn't actually solve the environment. Almost everybody that submits a project has gotten through the process of getting their agent to learn the environment and create the plots and all those kinds of programming-based things. But often there's an item in the rubric that says to clearly describe the learning algorithm, and that clearly describe is more than just naming the algorithm. And I'll have to say that most of the rejections occur because people say that our students say that they use DDPG, and then they move on to describing hyperparameters and neural network architectures, and never really talk about DDPG and what the key features are. So what's expected by that clearly describe is to, if you use DDPG, describe the key features of DDPG. How does it work? What is the actor and the critic, and what do they do? There's an experience replay buffer involved. How does it work? There's a soft update process as part of this algorithm, and what does that do? So, DDPG is more than just deep deterministic policy gradient. The name, it's it's the full list of all the different things that make up that algorithm. So, talk about each of those different parts of the algorithm. Doesn't have to be a dissertation. Just a couple sentences on each of those topics I listed here is sufficient to cover the requirement. But do more than just name the algorithm. Give a description of those key features. Another common oversight a few projects, I wouldn't say a high percentage, but probably the second most reason that projects get rejected is because the report itself doesn't include the rewards plot. Almost always the notebook generates the plot, and you can see the plot in the notebook, but the rubric expects you to make a copy of that image and include it in your report to make the report complete. So don't forget to do that. And then I would recommend in the rewards plot, the requirement is to do the episode by episode values for all the rewards. That's important to kind of see the variation in what happens episode to episode. But really, since your goal is to have a score that's based on an average, adding a second line that just shows the 100 episode average reward, then or score, that would give some better insight into showing when you actually solve the environment. It's another useful thing. Again, that's not required, but the best rewards plots include that. Okay, everything is done. It's time to submit your project. It's a fairly simple process. You create a zip file. Creating the zip file for the most part is if you're doing it on your own environment and you need to create the zip file to submit. If you're doing it on the Udacity environment, you can just include all the files that are required there on Udacity and upload the notebook. Well, the notebook's already in the environment, but upload your README file and your report file, either in Markdown or PDF format, and put those into the notebook and then save them with the library or put them in the zip file. And then also don't forget to include the state dictionary that you saved at the end of your project to show what those values were. One other item here, quite a few times I will see as a reviewer that the user has an entire directory structure with every project and many projects that they've worked on in the course, and they zip up that entire directory structure, and it can be 100 megabytes long. It takes a lot of space, takes forever to download. Requires the reviewer to search through that list of all the projects to find the specific project that is supposed to be graded here. So don't do that, please. Just zip up the folder that contains this one project and only submit that one project. So once you've submitted the project, reviewers will be selected at random, and within 8 hours they'll review your work and return the responses to you, and they'll go through element by element from the rubric and comment on what you did to meet the item or what was missing. If the reviewer thinks something was missing and wants more detail, just address their concerns and return the new revision to the project to be reviewed a second time. Viewers aren't trying to make it hard on you or make it difficult. They really have a really strict rubric to follow from Udacity, and we do our best to give you good advice and insights and extra information if we have it, and identify what you did well and could have done better. But if we think something's missing, please just address that concern and return the new results back for a second grade. Okay, so that's really all I had to say this evening. In summary, tonight we talked about the second project, continuous control. It's a continuous action space, so you have to use an agent that works with that. The deterministic policy gradient, DDPG, was the one that most students use to solve this environment. It's a good baseline model to become familiar with. It's not one of the most advanced or leading edge actor-critic methods, but it's the baseline, and it's good to be familiar with it. So this is a good project to experiment with that and show get your own knowledge base up on how that algorithm works. It's an actor-critic algorithm that we talked about last week. So it's like I said, a good experience. I would recommend DDPG for this one. If you want to try something different, that's fine. Or if you want to do DDPG on this one and then do something different on the third project, that's fine too. DDPG actually would work fine for either one of those two projects. But again, it's good to be familiar with that baseline, because it's the thing that introduced the actor-critic methods to the world, and first showed how those methods can be used to solve environments that have continuous action spaces. So modify that baseline model that you use from the bipedal walker menu project to work with the ML agents in the reacher environment, and then make any tweaks you need to neural net architectures or hyperparameters to get an agent that is successful. Then prepare your report. Don't forget that good description in your own words of the DDPG algorithm, and zip up your files and submit the project. And if anyone has any questions about the project or is running into any problems with their agent, being able to solve it, please post a message to the Slack group, and I'll see those messages and be happy to take a look at what you have and give some pointers on how to make it better. All right. With that, that's really all we had to say this evening. Hope you have a good success with this project. It's an interesting one. It's a really good project to become familiar with. As I mentioned, it's the first real introduction to actor-critic methods in a real project, and it's good knowledge to have. It's a great project from that perspective. So again, if you have any questions, just let me know. As always, if you're listening in live, immediately after the webinar this evening, we'll have an Ask Me Anything session, and you can post your questions to the AMA on Slack, and I'll be happy to answer them for you live. And with that, we'll see you next week. Bye.